A former Navy SEAL named Mark was walking his golden retriever beside a rainy lakeside road when a speeding SUV suddenly lost control and slid straight toward them. In a split second, Mark shoved his dog out of the way, taking the full impact himself. He was left in a coma with almost no chance of waking up. But the dog he saved refused to leave the hospital, lying beside his bed day after day. And what happened weeks later left even the doctors speechless. If this story moves your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe courage, loyalty, and God's quiet miracles still exist, please subscribe. Cold autumn wind moved slowly across the quiet streets of Cedar Ridge, carrying the scent of wet leaves and distant pine from the mountains beyond the town. Mark Sullivan stood beside his old pickup truck for a moment before stepping onto the gravel path. Cedar Ridge looked peaceful, the kind of place where nothing terrible ever seemed to happen. But peace was a strange thing to a man who had spent most of his adult life inside chaos. Mark was 38 years old, tall and broad-shouldered, with short dark hair already showing faint lines of gray near the temples. A thin scar ran along the edge of his jaw, one of many reminders from the years he had served as a Navy SEAL. Most people in town only knew that he had been in the military. They didn't know about the night raids, the sandstorms, the sound of helicopters disappearing into black skies. Some scars were not visible. Since returning home 6 months earlier, Mark rarely slept through the night. When darkness fell, memories returned with a precision that no dream should have. Faces, voices, the weight of choices made in seconds that could never be taken back. He had tried everything. Long runs, quiet fishing trips by the lake, even the therapist the VA recommended. None of it helped much. That morning had been another sleepless one. By noon, Mark had driven aimlessly through town until he found himself parking outside a small wooden building with a faded sign, Cedar Ridge Animal Rescue. He wasn't sure why he stopped. Maybe because the place looked quiet. Maybe because something inside him was tired of silence. The door creaked when he stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant, hay, and warm fur. Several dogs barked immediately, tails wagging, paws scratching against metal gates. "Easy there," a voice called from the back. A woman in her mid-50s appeared from behind a doorway carrying a clipboard. Her name tag read, Margaret Collins, the volunteer coordinator. Margaret had kind eyes, silver hair tied into a loose bun, and the calm patience of someone who had spent years caring for animals nobody else wanted. "Looking to adopt?" she asked gently. Mark shrugged slightly. "Just looking." Margaret nodded, as if she had heard that answer 100 times before. "Take your time," she said. "Some of them just like having someone walk past." Mark moved slowly along the row of kennels. Dogs barked, some jumped. One spun excited circles. Another pushed its nose through the bars, hoping for a scratch. Mark tried to smile, but it felt unnatural. He reached the last kennel at the end of the hallway and stopped. Inside sat a golden retriever. The dog looked about 3 years old, large and well-built, but thinner than it should have been. Its fur was a soft, honey gold color, though patches near the shoulders were rough where old mats had been cut away. The dog didn't bark. It simply watched. The name tag on the kennel read, Sonny. "Found him on the highway 3 months ago," Margaret said quietly from behind Mark. "No collar, no chip. Someone must have left him." Sonny remained seated, tail resting still against the floor. Most rescue dogs begged for attention. Sonny waited. Mark crouched down slowly in front of the kennel. For a moment, neither moved. Then the dog stepped forward, calm and deliberate. Sonny lowered his head and gently pressed his nose against Mark's hand through the bars. The contact was warm, steady. Mark felt something shift in his chest. something he had not felt since long before the war. Trust, not the loud, joyful kind. Something quieter, the kind two survivors recognize in each other. Mark swallowed slowly. "You're a quiet one," he murmured. Sonny blinked once, dark eyes calm and patient, as if he had already decided this man was worth waiting for. Margaret studied the scene from a few steps away. "That one's different," she said softly. "Doesn't bark, doesn't panic, just watches people like he's trying to figure them out." Mark rested his hand against the metal gate. Sonny leaned into it. For the first time in months, Mark noticed something strange. The noise in his mind, the constant echo of old missions and gunfire, had grown quieter. He exhaled slowly. "Can I take him out for a walk?" Mark asked. Margaret smiled. "Of course." She opened the kennel door. Sonny stepped out calmly, not rushing, not pulling on the leash when Margaret clipped it to his collar. The dog simply walked beside Mark, like he had been waiting for him. Mark didn't know it yet, but that quiet moment in a small rescue shelter was the first step in a bond that would soon be tested in ways neither of them could imagine. And before long, one of them would risk everything for the other. The lake at Cedar Ridge woke slowly under a pale morning sky, mist drifting across the water, while the first light of dawn touched the quiet pine trees along the shore. Mark Sullivan had not expected the dog to change his routine so quickly, but Sonny had a quiet persistence that was difficult to ignore. Every morning at exactly 6, the golden retriever sat beside the front door of Mark's small cabin, tail sweeping the wooden floor with calm patience, until Mark finally reached for his running shoes. Sonny was 3 years old, strong and athletic despite the months he had spent abandoned, his honey-colored coat beginning to grow fuller now that he was properly fed and cared for. Unlike many energetic retrievers, Sonny rarely barked. He seemed to prefer watching the world with steady attention, as if every movement carried meaning. Mark noticed it the first week they began running together around Cedar Ridge Lake. Sonny never ran far ahead like most dogs. Instead, he kept a steady pace beside Mark, occasionally glancing upward to make sure the man was still there. For Mark, the rhythm of their morning runs slowly became something close to peace. For the first time since leaving the Navy, his mind sometimes focused on the sound of water touching the shore instead of distant echoes of gunfire that lived somewhere deep in memory. The town began to notice them. Cedar Ridge was small enough that routines became stories quickly. The former Navy SEAL and the quiet golden dog became part of the scenery, running along the lake trail, sitting outside the grocery store, or walking slowly past the old diner on Main Street. Sonny's calm presence had a strange effect on people. Children approached him without fear. Elderly neighbors bent down to stroke his soft ears. Sonny accepted every gesture with the same patient kindness, though he always returned to stand close beside Mark as if guarding something invisible. One afternoon, Mark brought Sonny to the Cedar Ridge Veterinary Clinic, a modest brick building near the edge of town. That was where he first met Claire Bennett, the town's veterinarian. Claire was 32, with chestnut hair usually tied into a practical ponytail and observant green eyes that rarely missed small details. She had grown up in Cedar Ridge and returned after veterinary school because she believed small towns deserved good care for their animals. Years earlier, she had rescued a badly injured border collie after a highway accident, an experience that had shaped her quiet determination to help creatures that could not speak for themselves. Sonny stood calmly on the examination table while Claire checked his heartbeat. "Well," she said with a small smile, "this one is unusually composed." Mark crossed his arms. "Is that good?" "It means he trusts you," Claire replied. "Most rescue dogs carry anxiety. This one reads people instead." Sonny's tail moved slowly as Claire scratched behind his ear. The dog's eyes remained fixed on Mark. Over the following weeks, life settled into a pattern Mark had not expected. Mornings were spent running along the lake trails. Afternoons sometimes meant repairing the old cabin porch or helping neighbors with simple jobs. Evenings often ended with Sonny lying beside the couch while Mark read or simply stared at the quiet fire in the wood stove. But the most important change came at night. Before Sonny arrived, Mark rarely slept longer than 2 hours at a time. The memories always returned: sandstorms, helicopter rotors, radio voices cutting through darkness. Now, something different happened. Whenever Mark woke suddenly from a nightmare, Sonny was already there, resting his head across Mark's feet or pressing gently against his side. The dog never barked or moved anxiously. He simply stayed close until Mark's breathing slowed again. It was a small thing, but small things can rebuild a life. Spring slowly gave way to early summer. The forests around Cedar Ridge turned deep green, and the long evenings stretched golden across the lake. On most days, Mark almost believed he had left the war behind. Then came the rain. It started quietly one afternoon as dark clouds gathered above the mountains. Mark and Sonny followed their usual route along the narrow road that curved beside the lake. The pavement was slick, and wind moved across the water in long gray waves. Sonny paused suddenly near the roadside, ears lifting toward the distant sound of an approaching engine. Mark turned his head. From the top of the hill, a dark SUV appeared, moving too fast for the wet road. For a brief moment, everything became very quiet, and the next seconds would change both of their lives forever. Rain swept across Cedar Ridge Lake in thin silver lines, the road beside the water slick and dark beneath gathering storm clouds. Mark Sullivan noticed the SUV a second too late. The vehicle slid down the hill toward the curve of the lakeside road, its tires screaming briefly before losing grip on the wet asphalt. Sonny had stepped slightly ahead of him, curious about something near the roadside grass. The golden retriever's ears lifted at the sudden sound of the approaching engine, but the moment stretched into something fragile and irreversible. Mark's training reacted before his thoughts could catch up. Years of combat reflex moved his body forward in a single motion. "Sonny!" he shouted as he lunged. His hands struck the dog's side, pushing the 3-year-old retriever out of the lane. Sonny rolled across the wet grass, confused but unharmed. Mark never had time to step away. The dark SUV skidded sideways and slammed into him with a violent metallic crack that echoed across the quiet lake road. The impact threw Mark several feet across the pavement. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. Rain continued falling, tapping softly against the road while Sonny scrambled to his feet. The dog ran toward Mark immediately, paws sliding slightly on the slick surface. Mark lay motionless on the ground, his body twisted awkwardly, blood slowly mixing with rainwater beneath his head. Sonny circled him anxiously, whining in a low, desperate tone. The dog nudged Mark's shoulder with his nose, pushing gently as if trying to wake him from sleep. Inside the SUV, the driver struggled to open the door. Daniel Reeves, a 46-year-old traveling insurance salesman passing through Cedar Ridge, stumbled out onto the road. Daniel was tall but slightly overweight, his glasses crooked from the shock of the collision. Years earlier, he had survived a highway accident himself, something that had left him unusually sensitive to emergencies. The moment he saw Mark lying on the pavement, Daniel's face turned pale. "Oh, God. Oh, God," he muttered, fumbling for his phone. Sonny barked sharply now, louder than Mark had ever heard before. The dog stood over Mark's body as if guarding him, golden fur soaked by rain. Daniel dialed emergency services with shaking fingers. "Man down on Lake Road. He's been hit by a vehicle," Daniel said quickly. "He's not moving." Minutes later, the distant wail of sirens cut through the storm. The Cedar Ridge ambulance arrived first. 2 paramedics rushed out carrying medical equipment. One of them, Luis Ortega, a paramedic in his early 30s with calm, dark eyes and steady hands, had worked emergency calls for nearly a decade. Growing up in a crowded neighborhood of San Antonio had taught him to stay focused even when chaos surrounded him. Luis knelt beside Mark immediately. "He's breathing," he said firmly after checking the pulse, "but we've got a serious head injury." Sonny tried to move closer, whining softly, but the second paramedic gently guided the dog back. Sonny resisted at first, refusing to leave Mark's side until Luis spoke quietly to him. "Easy, boy. We're helping him." Something in the paramedic's voice seemed to calm the dog. Sonny stayed near the edge of the road, eyes locked on Mark as the medics lifted the injured man onto a stretcher. The ambulance doors slammed shut. Sonny began running. Through rain and mud, the golden retriever chased the flashing red lights as the ambulance sped toward Cedar Ridge Medical Center. The distance was nearly 2 miles, but Sonny ran without slowing, driven by something deeper than instinct. By the time the ambulance reached the hospital entrance, the dog arrived seconds later, chest heaving, paws muddy but determined. Inside the emergency room, doctors moved quickly around Mark's unconscious body. Machines beeped as nurses prepared equipment. Among them was Dr. Helen Carter, the hospital's senior trauma physician, a 50-year-old doctor known throughout the county for her sharp decisions under pressure. Years earlier, she had lost a patient during a delayed rescue, a memory that had shaped her relentless approach to emergency care. After examining Mark's injuries, her expression grew grave. "Severe cranial trauma," she said quietly. "Prepare for emergency surgery." Outside the operating room doors, Sonny lay down on the cold hospital floor, rainwater still dripping from his fur. Hours passed. The hospital lights dimmed as evening settled over Cedar Ridge. Finally, the doors opened. Claire Bennett arrived at the hospital just in time to hear Dr. Carter speak to the waiting staff. "He's alive," the doctor said carefully. "But the brain injury is serious. The odds of him waking up are very small." Sonny lifted his head slowly. The dog did not understand the words, but he understood something else. And that night, the quiet golden retriever began his long watch beside the hospital doors. The hospital corridors of Cedar Ridge Medical Center carried a quiet hum of machines and distant footsteps, the sterile scent of antiseptic lingering beneath the dim fluorescent lights that never truly allowed the building to sleep. Sonny had learned the rhythm of the place within days. The 3-year-old golden retriever no longer paced anxiously like he had on the first night. Instead, he lay beside the waiting chairs outside the intensive care unit with patient stillness, his golden coat slightly dull from weeks spent indoors, but his posture alert. Nurses began recognizing him immediately when their shift started. He watched every door that opened, every doctor who passed, as if expecting Mark to appear at any moment. Claire Bennett came almost every afternoon after finishing work at the veterinary clinic. She often sat beside Sonny on the hospital floor, quietly brushing his fur or bringing small pieces of cooked chicken so he would keep his strength. Claire had always been calm under pressure, but even she found something extraordinary about the dog's devotion. "You're stubborn," she sometimes whispered to him with a tired smile. Sonny would simply rest his head on her knee before turning his eyes back toward the ICU doors. After several discussions with hospital staff, Claire convinced the administration to allow Sonny short visits with Mark. The decision had been approved by Dr. Helen Carter, who believed that familiar voices and presence could sometimes stimulate neurological response in patients suffering severe brain trauma. On the first visit, Sonny entered the quiet hospital room cautiously. The machines surrounding Mark beeped steadily while the former Navy SEAL lay motionless beneath white sheets. Tubes and monitors traced the fragile line between life and uncertainty. Sonny approached the bed slowly, nose trembling as he recognized the scent of the man who had pushed him away from death on that rainy road. Then the dog placed his head gently on Mark's arm. He did not move again for nearly an hour. The nurses who observed the scene later began calling Sonny the little soldier. The name spread quietly through the hospital staff. Sonny seemed to understand the role without needing explanation. Each day he returned to the same chair beside Mark's bed, watching the machines with steady attention as if guarding a wounded commander. Days turned into weeks. The town of Cedar Ridge slowly learned about the accident. Some residents visited the hospital. Others left flowers near the entrance or small dog treats for Sonny at the front desk. Mark, however, remained unconscious. Among the night nurses working the ICU was Emily Harper, a 28-year-old nurse with short blonde hair and tired blue eyes that carried both compassion and resilience. Emily had grown up caring for a younger brother with a chronic illness, something that shaped her patients long before she entered medical school. She often volunteered to monitor Mark's room during night shifts, because Sonny usually slept there quietly beside the bed. One stormy evening, heavy thunder rolled across Cedar Ridge as rain battered the hospital windows. Lightning flashed briefly through the room, illuminating the silent machines surrounding Mark's bed. Sonny lay curled beside the chair when suddenly his ears lifted sharply. Something had changed. The dog stood and placed his paws lightly against the mattress, staring intently at Mark's face. A low whine escaped his throat before he began barking, short, urgent bursts unlike anything the nurses had heard from him before. Emily rushed into the room immediately. "What is it, boy?" she asked, stepping closer to the monitors. At that moment, the heart monitor beeped irregularly. Emily's training took over. She pressed the emergency call button on the wall. Within seconds, Dr. Carter and several staff members entered the room. "Vitals are shifting," Emily reported quickly. Dr. Carter examined Mark's neurological response, shining a small light across his pupils. For a moment, the room fell silent. Then Mark's right hand twitched. It was barely noticeable, just the smallest movement of a finger, but everyone saw it. Dr. Carter exhaled slowly. "He's responding." Sonny wagged his tail once, softly. Over the next several days, Mark's condition slowly improved. His eyes eventually opened, though confusion clouded his gaze and his body remained extremely weak. Months of rehabilitation now stood between him and the life he once knew. The doctors explained that the brain injury had damaged his balance and muscle coordination. Walking again would not be easy. But every morning, Sonny waited at the end of the hallway, and Mark, still learning how to stand again, began the long journey toward recovery. Morning sunlight filtered through the tall hospital windows, spreading pale gold across the rehabilitation hallway where Mark Sullivan stood gripping the parallel bars with trembling hands. Recovery, Mark quickly learned, was not heroic. It was slow, frustrating, and often humiliating. The once powerful Navy SEAL who had carried 80 pounds of gear across deserts now struggled to lift his own body weight without losing balance. Months of coma and brain trauma had weakened his muscles and disrupted the quiet communication between mind and body. His right leg trembled every time he tried to step forward. The physical therapist assigned to his case, Jacob Miller, watched closely from a few feet away. Jacob was 35, broad-shouldered and calm, a former college athlete who had chosen rehabilitation medicine after helping his father recover from a spinal injury years earlier. That experience had shaped his patience. He understood that healing was not measured in miles, but in inches. "Easy," Jacob said gently. "One step at a time." Mark inhaled slowly and shifted his weight forward. At the far end of the hallway sat Sonny. The golden retriever had grown slightly thinner during the long weeks at the hospital, but his posture remained proud and attentive. At 3 years old, Sonny was still young, yet something about his quiet gaze carried the steadiness of an old guardian. Each morning, the nurses allowed him to wait near the therapy area. Sonny never barked or ran toward Mark. Instead, he simply watched, waiting. That small distance between them, 10 cautious steps of polished hospital floor, became Mark's battlefield, step by step. Each time Mark stumbled, Sonny's ears lifted slightly, and the dog's tail moved with quiet encouragement. Mark noticed it even through the frustration and exhaustion. "You're not giving me a choice, are you?" Mark muttered under his breath one afternoon. Sonny tilted his head slightly, as if acknowledging the challenge. Weeks passed. The steps became steadier. The trembling in Mark's legs slowly faded as muscles remembered their old strength. Claire visited often during this time, sometimes bringing Sonny outside to walk through the hospital courtyard when the dog needed fresh air. She noticed something else during those visits. Sonny tired more quickly than before. At first, she blamed the long months of stress and irregular routine. But one afternoon, while listening to the dog's chest with a small portable stethoscope she carried, Claire felt her expression grow uneasy. Sonny's heartbeat was not normal. Later that evening, Claire ran several tests at the veterinary clinic. The results confirmed what she had feared. A serious congenital heart condition had worsened dramatically. Prolonged stress and exhaustion had likely accelerated the disease. Claire sat quietly in the clinic office for a long time before calling Mark. When she finally spoke, her voice was careful but honest. "He may only have a few weeks, maybe a little longer," she said softly. Mark did not answer for several seconds. The news settled heavily in the silence, but Sonny seemed unaware of the diagnosis. The dog continued his routine beside Mark every day, encouraging him through the final stages of rehabilitation. And eventually the morning arrived when Mark walked the length of the hospital hallway without assistance. Jacob smiled when it happened. "Looks like you're ready to graduate." The first place Mark chose to go after leaving the hospital was the same road beside Cedar Ridge Lake where the accident had happened. It was late summer now. The trees had begun to hint at autumn again, and the water shimmered quietly beneath the fading sun. Mark walked slowly along the grassy edge of the road. Sonny trotted beside him. When they reached the small clearing overlooking the lake, Mark sat down in the grass. Sonny lowered himself beside him with a tired sigh, resting his golden head against Mark's knee. For a long moment, neither moved. The sun dipped lower across the water. Sonny lifted his eyes toward Mark once more. His tail moved gently against the grass, just once, as if finishing a promise made long ago on a rainy road. Then the dog grew still. Mark wrapped his arms around the quiet, golden body and held him there until the last light faded across Cedar Ridge Lake. 1 year later, a small wooden sign stood near the edge of town. Sonny House, Rescue and Therapy, Dogs for Veterans. And inside that place, every dog carried a little piece of the hero who had saved a soldier's life. Some miracles do not arrive with thunder or shining light. Sometimes they arrive quietly, on 4 paws, with loyal eyes and a heart that refuses to give up. Sonny did not wear a uniform, yet he fought beside Mark with a courage no battlefield could measure. When the world grew dark, that small golden soul became the light that guided a wounded soldier back to life. Perhaps that is how God works in our lives, not always through grand signs, but through simple companions placed in our path at exactly the moment we need them most. In our everyday lives, we may pass by these quiet miracles without noticing. A loyal dog waiting at the door, a stranger offering kindness, a small act of love that changes someone's entire world. These moments remind us that hope is never truly lost, and that sometimes the help we pray for comes in forms we never expected. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share where you are watching from and what this story meant to you. Your voice may inspire someone else who needs hope today. Please like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe so you never miss the next story of courage, loyalty, and faith. And before you go, may God watch over you, bless your family, and fill your days with unexpected miracles.
Paul had a story. We share powerful story of loyalty and courage. If this story took you, like the video, share your truth in the comment and subscribe for more.